Okay, let's get started. A small group today. I think most with some. I know there is a couple of activities on at the same time, and not least the South African Academy of Health Educators Conference. So we don't have our normal numbers of attendance. There's also quite a couple of clinical activities or clinical related meetings, service related meetings as well. But let's get straight into it in terms of a discussion around the Entrustable professional activities. I want to remind you that this is the second of 3 sessions, and last week we discussed competency-based medical education vis-a-vis Entrustable professional activities, and we gave some of the principles. Today, I want to recap some of the same points just so we're all on the same page, but also then to just speak to the specifics of mobile technology and how they might be able to help us with respect to the implementation of Entrustable professional activities. Next week, we focus more on the actual development of the EPAs. So we'll be speaking to the template, the 8-step template that allows us to develop an EPA, Entrustable professional activity. And we'll go through that template and some of the pitfalls, etc., and the tips and the tricks and tips to be able to develop them appropriately. I must also note, colleagues, that there is a workshop on the it will be in July or August. The date has just been changed because we've got a clash with some of the registrar activities. So we'll be having it in the second half of July is currently the intention. Christine, if you might note that for Precious and yourself, just to touch base with me about the logistics of that event. But that event is around the SACOM, the South African Community of Medical Deans, and the colleges of medicine coming together to run a national faculty development workshop, and it's been happening at each of the different universities. And Wits is the last on the list, but then it will be a top quality workshop by the time they get to us, and that's been put together by the national task team or national committee under the auspices of SACOMED and the colleges, and from which I'm a part. Okay, so just to quickly have a brief recap of where we're at. Remembering, colleagues, that there are just some points I wanted to from last week that I wanted to just focus down again on, and I've taken this from 2 pieces of work. One is the document that the particular article that I did share on the advert for this session around the mobile technologies, and the second is some unpublished work that I've been working on as part of a group of authors led by Taslim Russ, who's a colleague of mine in family medicine, and we're about to publish or send it for publishing that particular work. So we've done some literature, looked at the literature with regards to this. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these points, but I want to make basically three points on the slide. One is that traditionally the knowledge, skills, and professional components comprise the different competencies, and we're all familiar with such. Some of and that essentially allows us to be focusing on is the nuts and bolts of competency-based medical education. Remembering, though, that some of them are tangible and some of them are more intangible ones. The professional components are the intangible ones that are difficult to assess. A, they're difficult to measure. B, they're difficult, therefore, to assess in any meaningful way. And Fernandez speaks of the individual's personal characteristics, attitudes, and values as they may manifest in professional judgment. And so those tangible and less tangible components is an uncomfortable combination for us to be able to appropriately assess properly. Now, it is important as well that we recognize, as the third point, that competencies themselves can be broken down into domains. and those, for example, the CanMeds framework and others are largely based on domains, and the medical expert, the scholar, the communicator, and the like of the CanMeds and AFIMEDs are examples of domains of competence. And there is, however, a need to get a little bit more specific and a little bit more relevant to the workplace in this regard. So what's happening is essentially a shift in three ways. First of all, there's an increasing discussion on whether and how high stakes decisions about learner progression can actually be based on multiple lower stakes assessment data. Now, critically, that has to be multiple lower stakes assessment data, aggregated, yes, but with feedback, and that's the second shift. And that means that we have to have appropriate feedback that is provided. Now, the question of this multiple lower stakes assessment data is a critical one with regards painting a picture, but in multiple pixels that can be then aggregated together to form over time a true and reliable picture of a student's competence. And that is really been the basis of the workplace-based assessment, and then the systems to be able to support the capturing of the data of those multiple lower stakes decisions with feedback. Importantly, the second way in which, or the third, should I say, that shift in medical education is a shift in thinking from assessing what and how well a trainee has done, in Miller's terminology, to estimating as a learner's readiness to assume clinical responsibilities in the near future. Now, you recall last week I spoke to the fact that that George Miller, back in 1985, when putting the Miller's pyramid together, with the knows how, shows, and does, he spoke in very little detail about how one actually assesses the does component, but spoke rather about how the assessment of knows how, or knows and knows how at the bottom, can be done quite reliably, but the reliability decreases as one goes up the chain from knows to knows how to shows to does. For example, an OSCE is not particularly reliable. And is not particularly authentic. And that's the challenge, because you want to be at the top of the pyramid. You want to be able to assess the shows how and does. And principally, you want to show the does. Says the does. Because that's linked principally to for a registrar, for example, to be deemed to be competent. At the college, or in the colleges, should I say, the respective colleges, there's been a move to introduce simulated patients in an OSCE format and reduce the numbers of real authentic patients. And this takes some of the authenticity away from a high stakes exam. And is that essential? And you appreciate that the tension between that, the tension between the efficiencies of providing that exam on the one side, vis-a-vis the lack of reliability and authenticity of that particular exam. Which is why there has been the move towards the introduction of entrustable professional activities, which are really introduced to bridge the divide between the competency-based medical education theory and clinical practice. Because in theory, CBME should work very well, but in practice it doesn't, in the sense that it does not provide this authenticity and reliability that we require. Now, you could argue that workplace-based assessment in itself is fairly difficult in order for it to be reliable. There's got to be a lot of logistics, and there's got to be a lot of systems around it in order to be able to capture the data appropriately. And that's why the technology is needing to help us, and we'll come to that. So the definition of the EPAs is, and this is Tenkate and Taylor. In fact, this is originally Taylor's and adopted by Tenkate in 2021. The units of professional practice. An EPA is a unit of professional practice, tasks or bundle of tasks, that can be fully entrusted to an individual once they've demonstrated the necessary competence to execute them unsupervised. Now, I remind you that the entrustable professional activities that are deemed have demonstrated the necessary competence, or a student to registrar has demonstrated the necessary competence to execute them unsupervised. That word unsupervised might be slightly different at year 1, 2, 3, or 4, as I outlined last week. In that it might be that based on the EPA, for it being a particularly, should I say, simple and uncomplicated EPA, that at registrar 1 level they would be doing it unsupervised. So could you argue that the completion of the completion of, for example, doing for a registrar to complete to be able to do a pap smear unsupervised, coupled with though the appropriate history taking, examination, and counselling of a patient as collectively an EPA, that then can we entrust that individual to be doing it unsupervised at level 1, whereas a more complicated EPA related to potentially, for example, a cesarean section may then be unsupervised, I beg your pardon, supervised at year 1 level, and directly supervised at year 1 level, as opposed to year 3, a cesarean section will of course be will be a level of competency that the registrar will be able to be expected to perform in an unsupervised manner. So it does differ. It does differ on the basis of complexity of the task and difficulty of the task, or the EPA per se, and secondly on the level of at which the registrar is situated at within the course, within their program. The matter of trust is critical, and that has been measured. And I remind you again, and forgive me for going over it again, but I think this is all fairly new to many of us, and so I hope it's helpful to review these things. And that is that we have developed entrustment supervision scales have been developed and incorporated into the development of EPAs, or the EPA systems. And you recall that there is a fundamental basic entrustment scale that then can be elaborated on in great detail, and that speaks to one, that the most basic of scales is one, is that the person is not permitted to do the task, and that they're only permitted to observe. That's the basic level. The second is that they have direct supervision, and that is direct stroke proactive supervision, and that speaks to the intent of the supervisor. The third level is indirect supervision or reactive supervision, and the fourth is being able to do it unsupervised, and the fifth, in fact, if I may put it that way, is to be able to teach it and train a junior. And those are the 4/5, if you include the teaching component, basic EPA entrustment level decisions. But many different disciplines have incorporated quite detailed entrustment scale decision frameworks to speak to the absolute practicality of what happens when, for example, you are running an ops list in theatre. And can you step away for a cup of tea? Can you step away to go for lunch? Can you delegate? And it's at this level that some of the different disciplines internationally have unpacked this. Okay, so I want to just touch on bring this discussion now, this presentation and I'm going to return to some of the same points, but I'm going to frame them now within the context of the application of mobile technologies. So I ask you to keep that lens in the forefront of your mind when we talk about these issues. And this speaks to the document I shared, which is an AMI guide that entitled Mobile Technologies to Support Workplace-Based Assessment for Entrustment Decisions, Guidelines for Programs and Educators. I just wanted to highlight a few points, many of which are principles that we just need to be looking to. So it was developed to support institutions and programs who wish to use mobile technology to implement EPA-based decisions or assessment, and more generally, any type of workplace-based assessment. The article covers backgrounds of WBAs, EPAs, and entrustment making decision, provides guidance for choosing or developing mobile technology, discusses challenges, and describes best practices. I'm not going to touch on everything in the article. You're welcome to read it yourselves, but I do want to just highlight some of the main key issues, colleagues. So in summary, the direct observation and other sources of information have become standard in many clinical programs, and you know this as well. But then entrustable professional activities have also become a central focus of assessment. Clinical supervisors are asked to document assessment ratings using forms and computers. Cumbersome access, though, and these are not easily integrated into existing clinical workflows. In fact, the article, colleague, speaks of capturing forms on computers, but really, in many instances, these are not, these particularly at undergraduate level at the moment in the WITS platform are more on a paper-based logbook. Am I correct? And it's not necessarily the case that we have the captured on computer. Those are then compared. Yes, those are aggregated on a computer, but certainly the point of care, as for this fourth point on this slide, is not the typical way in which data is captured on the performance of a undergraduate student or registrar. So the mobile technology does allow us to be able to document learner performance at the point of care, and allows for some efficiencies, A, and efficacy, B, of workplace-based assessment integrated with patient care. So it's rapidly becoming a standard, and MT, or mobile technology using smartphones, has the potential to align WBA with clinical work in teaching hospitals, causing only limited disruption. Mobile applications can be bought or created, and I want to say a word on that. There's a checklist of considerations that this article provides, and I'm going to highlight a few of those. But in addition, the finances, infrastructure, privacy, ethics, data access, and ownership, and indeed device sanitation is something that one needs to consider. I must also make a point here, if I may, speaking to the bigger picture, and that is the introduction of the Memorandum of Understanding, or the Memorandum of Agreement, between the Gauteng Department of Health and the WITS Faculty of Health Sciences. We have to do everything we can within the context of postgraduate training and undergraduate training to make the burden of training as limited and as insignificant and minimal as possible. A, and B, we must, and what that principally entails is for an individual to be trained completely on the clinical platform, as opposed to in the central platform of WITS. Of course, our registrar programs are significantly, 90% that anyway, I suggest, on the clinical platform. But those same registrars are coming in to train our undergraduate students. And that's problematic in the sense that it's taking them away from service. And if we can have the WBAs eventually, and the training and there's many other elements to it, but the training done on the clinical platform completely so, for undergraduates as well, that would ensure the buy-in of our Gauteng department and districts and clinical managers and CEOs, etc. Okay, so there are really four sources of information that can be captured on mobile technology as part of workplace-based assessment. I'm going to go through these very quickly. And you're familiar with many of these, so that's exactly why I'm going to run through it very fast. First of all, the brief direct observations are the key ones, and the mini CX and the DOPS and field notes and the like to document these observations are well known to all of you. I've included the snaps on this here, which is learner-centered as opposed to patient-centered. I'm going to pause on that one because it's actually listed elsewhere. I added it into this document, but under this brief direct observations, but incorrectly so, in the sense that direct means with the patient present, and that it's rather a learner conversation or learner discussion under which the snaps is formed. Some of you might not be familiar with the acronym SNAPS, but we'll get to that in a moment. I also want to note the voice recognition software that a mobile device and a application can provide the functionality for. Now, this is amazingly helpful because it means that a clinician supervisor can just leave a brief voice note on the using an app that can then be able to provide some brief feedback. Now, we don't have to be necessarily particularly standard about how we capture that because we want multiple voice notes. So this, but however, there is a challenge within the transcription of that voice note, and then well, not really a challenge with the transcription because that can fairly easily happen. But B is the capture of the data and essentially having qualitative data transcribed or translated into quantitative assessment data, and that's an important consideration for us all going forward. The second is longitudinal monitoring, and this is really the multi-source feedback principally, and then repeated direct observations with a longitudinal supervisory relationship. And this speaks back to what I was talking about around the multiple small stakes observations over time with feedback, in which various colleagues are asked to report their observations and experiences during the period of time. And it can easily be automated, and several e-portfolio systems have incorporated it. Now, the longitudinal monitoring is particularly useful from a 360-degree perspective for those professional components that we've spoken to previously. And that it means that one can get a holistic impression of professional behavior from multiple individuals. And it has been known to support entrustment decisions. Now, you recall that I spoke last week around these elements around it, the entrustment, the trust that speak around an EPA, and how, yes, we can have that C, which is the capability, and as we've always done, we assess that capability in terms of knowledge, in terms of skills in particular, and we can capture that capability as well over time in multiple low stakes assessments around the bedside, recording on the mobile app, the performance in each of the mini CXs or patient presentation, or et cetera, et cetera. But it's the A-rich framework, the A agency, the A-rich entrustment decision, A-rich entrustment decision, A for agency, R for reliability, I for integrity, C, yes, for capability, and H for humility. And if we use the technology to capture voice notes from multiple individuals, or we quite simply have within a summative context, colleagues, an entrustment committee that through regular working with the registrar, that they can speak to these issues, all of them, as a committee. And yes, there's significant faculty development that has to happen around that. But for everyone to be on the same page as to what we mean by humility, for example. I saw an excellent quote some time ago around humility, and that is, it's not about thinking of yourself as less, humility, but rather thinking it's not about thinking of your less of yourself, but rather thinking of yourself less, is what humility is. Because it's a strength as opposed to a weakness. And we all know that there are multiple instances of both faculty and students not displaying the humility that is required. Joint appointees and all of us are guilty at one point or another for not having the humility required. And it is those who have the humility who tend to be the quietest and are not dominating and are not given the credence that they should be. And so there is an excitement internationally about how EPAs and the multi-source feedback of a registrar's competence with respect to or entrustment, should I say, not competence, entrustment to do these units of professional practice, but are assessed within the context of making an AA-rich entrustment decision. Right. And then just the third and fourth, just very quickly, this is where the snaps comes in, is this individual discussions where we sit with a registrar or we're walking down the corridor with a registrar and we're having a discussion with them about the patients that has been classed or has just been presented on the wardrobes. And to be able to provide a 1-minute preceptor engagement, which speaks to providing then the different frameworks for 1-minute preceptor, but you need to give the appropriate feedback in terms of what was done well, what very briefly, what could be improved and where to from here. And there's some development and training and faculty development that needs to be done around that, but it can be done quickly and easily. And then the second one that's noted here is sorry, it's down at number 4 and 5 I'm speaking to now as the snaps, where snaps in with the acronym, you can again be after the ward round, one can quickly engage in terms of asking the registrar to give a summary of the patient just seen in terms of for example, their problem list, and then narrowing down on the differential diagnosis. Assessment A of what is going on and what is the likely diagnosis. Then looking to probe the registrar, and for the registrar to be probing the consultant on what issues there are around this patient that have been raised by SNA. So in a two-way street, but predominantly trying to see if the registrar has demonstrated the critical thinking to ask the appropriate questions that they've been wondering about. The plan is the second P, and self-directed feedback is the last one in terms of us giving feedback. Now, we've been using this in the Nelson Mandela Fidel Castro program for some time, but I think it is more appropriately used because it's a slightly higher level engagement than a mini CX. And you can then capture that by mobile technology. You can capture that on a voice note or in a quick tick box exercise within the SNAPS framework on the mobile. And you don't have to do all of it. You don't have to do every element of SNA PPS on mobile. You can capture 3 of the 6 components. Similarly, on the mini CX, you don't have to capture everything because there are multiple. The plan is for there to be multiple assessments that are captured. And then it's not marked out of 100 or 50, it's marked out of 25 or 10, whichever the 3 out of 5 component is. Case-based discussions, chart simulated recall, many oral exams are all individual discussions that can take place. And they are appropriately are able to inform entrustment-based decisions, either on an ad hoc basis, and then the data, though, can collectively come to a summative entrustment decision committee over time. But then that can only happen easily and reliably and efficiently if the technology assists the capture of the data from multiple parties that can then be aggregated and summarized and presented back to the entrustment decision committee for them to be able to take a decision on the entrustment of that registrar at whichever level they happen to be working with at the time. The entrustment-based decision itself is that there's a discussion technique as well that we won't cover today, but it's also designed to support the estimation of risks when making entrustment decisions. And then just lastly, and we must just complete the picture here, not so much at undergraduate level, but the there'll be performance, outcome of performance that impact that can be assessed by a registrar over time. In the can one assess the actual patient care, metrics of patient care that's been provided by the registrar over the 4-year period, over each year? Difficult, but one can come back a little bit along the timeline to look at process indicators of patient care. And there's some examples in dentistry and surgery, for example, in terms of what is done. But there are ways in which this can be then also assessed, whether an individual is an entrustment, it can be entrusted to do the work. And this is important that it is potentially has to be very much customized, of course, to the different, as all of these EPA decisions have to be, they're customized to the particular discipline. So. And the one of the key aspects is that the products of the trainee don't necessarily can be assessed. This is not necessarily in the presence of the trainee, but rather as the system and what's happening for is there, if the registrar is responsible for the running of OPD as a unit of professional practice, because remembering that EPAs are units of professional practice, but they can be defined on the basis of procedure or disease or function. Now, the easiest ones are function. In other words, running an OPD or running an antenatal care clinic is a unit of professional practice because that's what has to be done. And on Tuesday, what do we know? Tuesday afternoon, tomorrow morning, the registrar needs to be able to be trusted to run an antenatal clinic. And if they can do that, and then if through having been in the mix for this last 6 months, of this year, and everyone gives input on in terms of whether they can do so or not in a multi-source feedback manner, having captured data in the app over time, ideally, then that entrustment decision can be made. But you could argue that well, how is the actual OPD, beg your pardon, the antenatal clinic? What is the quality of work that's done within that context? And are there metrics at the moment that are in play for assessing it? And there's certain, and if the antenatal care clinic is not doing very well, then you could argue that that could be a negatively impact your entrustment of that registrar. Of course, we need to be careful about this, and it's not easy to measure because there are multiple factors. So, for example, at one extreme would be that an individual or the percentage of unbooked patients or late bookings, I beg your pardon, say after 12 weeks of patients attending an antenatal clinic. The registrar can't have a significant impact on that. So you can't really use that as a metric of performance. But whether the booking bloods are done in an antenatal care context, RPI, HIV, resus, etc., whether they're done or not is a metric of it. And so then you can use that to inform the entrustment decision. Okay, so I'm going to move over this one because we don't want to go into all of this. But I do want to come to this slide very quickly, and that's that there are many challenges, and often it's around faculty development and training. Supervisors and trainees often inadequately trained in WBAs. Arguments made that there's insufficient time for these direct observations and or feedback conversations. But faculty development speaks to this. Feedback was frequently inadequate, undermining its credibility. And again, one wants to be trained on specific ways of giving feedback, and specific, not ways, approaches and ways of giving it. There's the Pemberton method of feedback. There's the Aloba method of feedback. There is the sandwich method, which I've described already, And then there are different ways of giving it, and one needs to be doing that appropriately. Many supervisory relationships are brief and change frequently, particularly in the undergraduate space. The more the registrar space is better, much better in our context, well, in my context in family medicine, for example. But one needs to be doing, the fact is that they're very brief, and so one can't get a good picture of the registrar's entrustability. Excuse me. And then the other last point on this is that, excuse me, trainees often perceive assessment as summative, even when intended as formative. And then they won't be relaxed and in a learning frame of mind, but rather they want to conform. And that's a cultural change that we need to work at. And the other side of the coin of this is that trainers are also not in a formative mode, and they don't also they often fail to fail, and they won't be comfortable with giving 2 out of 20 when they should be. Why? Because there's a chance the next day and the next week for them to improve that mark. Okay, so lastly, 2 slides, if I may. One is that what can a mobile app do? So a couple of different things, but I want to point out the first one that I want to point out, if I may, please, is the third one on this, and that is the learner-initiated direct access and assessment. WBAs, and they are on an ad hoc basis, are generally best in the literature, are best work if it's learner initiated. Yes, they're going to be standard ways and scheduled direct observations, snaps and the like. But if it can be that it's learner initiated, then they've taken control of their own not of their own assessments, but of the need to have them. So they can pull up the assessment directly for their EPA on their own phone, and they can use they can then it can be captured by the supervisor on their device. Back to the top, the supervisor may be able to complete their assessment of at their own time in their own device, authorized by the institution, and submit feedback to the learner to read later. Couple of data issues there, but we'll come to that. Secondly, or thirdly, provisional self-assessment is that the learner might self-evaluate on the device and then send a report to a supervising clinician for confirmation. That also makes things slightly easier, and not so much a burden on the supervisor. And then lastly, there's simultaneous and self and supervisor assessment. And that's perhaps the richest of all, is that they can both simultaneously complete an assessment and compare immediately and trigger a feedback discussion. Now, I want to stress that it's a combination of all of these that ultimately provides the pixel for the appropriate and longitudinal assessment of the student by EPAs, and it's technology that can assist with this. Okay, and I think this is my last slide, so I do want to just speak to this in the context of what's going on at the moment. We've got doctor colleagues in the School of Clinical Medicine, and we've got another application called ComCare within the undergraduate space. We've got a number of applications of mobile technologies in the postgraduate space. In family medicine, for example, we've got Scorion, which is not so much a mobile technology per se, but it's rather an e-logbook. And it's at the moment is utilizable it can be used in the manner that I've described in this presentation in the point of care context. Importantly, the big thing about cost is that at the moment, the majority of these are international. And 2 things about that. One is that it costs significant money. Doctor isn't, but Scorion is, Logbox is, EPAs is from out of the Netherlands. Logbox isn't actually, forgive me, I think it's South African, but that's the consideration is whether how much it costs. And the other point is that sometimes you want to do with that there was the quality aspect that you want to be making this ourselves, customizing it ourselves for our own use per discipline or per institution or whatever it might be. And generally it's per discipline as opposed to institution. And as opposed to buying in a sort of bespoke solution, because it's often not just bespoke. It's often, so one has to be careful of that. The current discussion at the moment in the colleges is that there's going to be potentially a Pakistani model that is going to be utilized and brought in because it's gained some favor in the college and the South African Committee of Medical Deans, and there's a possibility that that's going to be part and parcel of the offering, because it seems like, I haven't seen the product, but it seems like it's going to be, it may be adaptable for our circumstances. But there'll be some challenges for it not being built from the ground up in our context. You undergraduate versus postgraduate, South African versus Pakistani, etc. This context matters. And particularly the undergraduate space is a difficult one to think of because there's so many supervisors. Whereas in the postgraduate space, there are fewer. And that is a little bit more manageable and easier. I want to note the data connectivity and that for example, and that goes with the second one as well, is what is the offline capability of the device? In that you can't can you capture the information? Are you able for it to be captured on the app and then uploaded later? Now we have about 65. No, they're less than that now. We've shut some down, but there's a significant number, about 48 or so now, if I recall correctly, that of hotspots that are sort of home solution on the platform, on the WITS platform. Now that home solution is exactly that, so it's inadequate. We put them in A, C, and L. A, C, and R, beg your pardon, spaces. A is the academic, into the tutorial room, C is clinical, and R is residential. And you have therefore for the students, that is, and that's a possibility. Then one is able to access the internet, but it's not a good solution, and we need an intermediate solution between that hotspot with or without data as backup that we provide our undergraduate students at the moment. We need an intermediate solution between that home solution and not great solution and the fiber option. Now, Barra's got fiber now. They've rolled it out. It's happening at Helen Joseph soon. It's going to be happening at the Clarkstor Sapong complex soon. And it will be happening at other sites over the next few years. But what is the intermediate solution? And that's a critical question around data connectivity. The 5Ds refers to a framework that we have developed within the context of the DFMPC, and that's just really about working online. And the 5Ds are data, the coverage, data coverage, or is the first MTN or cell C coverage, etc. If it's not fiber, for example, the device is the other one, is the second D. The data is the third, if they need it or not. And then the others are direction, as in faculty giving direction to the students in terms of how to work online and what training needs to be done on that of the student and of faculty to be able to give that direction. And the fifth D speaks to diligence of the student to be able to do the job online in terms of these assessments and WBAs, etc., and just the driving the process, which could be the 6D. Data management. What do we do with all of this data? Because over time, we're going to build up significant server space of data from these assessments. And the data and security management of that, the security and data management of that is important. We haven't worked that out with Doctor and ComCare and the others. The last one is reporting. Second to last one is reporting, and that what is the reporting that an HOD would like to know? What does that report look like? If we are going to give information per not only per student, but per site, A, per academic complex, B, academic health complex, B, across different sites in terms of the common disease profile that is seen, or the common procedures that is seen. So what data are we aggregating in the form of the report that the HOD would want to know and receive on a monthly basis, which will be able to compare one site with another and be proxies for the quality and the access to appropriate training. And lastly, the system adaptability. This is not a static state. This changes every day, practically, what one can do with technology and how can one adapt the technology appropriately. So thank you very much for your attention. I note that we've introduced .doctor now in terms of a mobile technology app in the GIMP1 space, quite simply to capture attendance, A, including in the UMI space for when they attend, and B, there some reflective voice notes from the students. And then we'll grow that with the same group of students next year and the same group of students in GIMP 3 and GIMP 4 thereafter. And hopefully it can be used over time to potentially .doctor or others for the undergraduate EPA model, should we choose to introduce that eventually. And then the different colleges and disciplines are introducing or looking to develop the EPAs currently, to develop the workplace-based assessment models, and then thirdly is to have the appropriate technology to support that. Okay, colleagues, thanks very much. I'm mindful that I've gone on for a long time, and I do apologize for the length of my presentation. I don't know if there are any comments or questions on that presentation, and or thoughts on the potential and the use of potential of EPAs or the use of technology. Adam, you're very welcome.
Hi, Prof. Cook. Thanks very much for the presentation this week and last week. I just wanted to ask, I'm from the Division of Anatomical Pathology. I'm one of the pathologists here. I was quite interested in postgraduate training and assessment. We realize these entrustable professional activities are coming along, and we've sort of introduced some work-based place assessments, mainly paper-based, which we found there's quite a sort of barrier, I think, to people doing them and filling them in and providing feedback. So I think using electronic sort of formats or devices would be the way forward. I just wanted to check, because we struggled to find anything that, which we had access to that sort of suited our needs. But, something like this .doctor app or software system seems like the kind of functionality that would be helpful. Is this available like within WITS? Would we be able to get access to it and try and start using it with our registrars and consultants, or is it just a certain departments have access to it?
So a couple of points on that, and thanks, Adam. It's important questions. So first of all, the .doctor has been developed in partnership with a group called the Social Collective. They own the IP on .doctor, but it is we have a partnership with them that allows us to tweak the .doctor functionality, and working in close partnership with them over the course of this year going forward. We tried to introduce it at the beginning. We tried to introduce it a few years ago now, but we're not particularly successful, because we tried it within the GAME 3 and 4 space, and it just required too many resources to be able to do it successfully across different departments in the clinical space. So that's why we focused on a more easily manageable and then iterative approach for the .doctor, beginning in terms of the level of functionality and keeping it fairly superficial, and then at a lower level in the undergraduate space at GIMP 1 level first. And in fact, we'll be doing it within using it within community visits for first-year medical students next year, hopefully, where we're just capturing their attendance and reflections. But more importantly, to your question or to your context, if I may say, I want to just flag for you that there are four streams, there are four work streams at the college level that are doing some considerable work around trying to support the different disciplines and institutions nationally from an InMed registrar perspective. And one of them is on the technology, one of those work streams. And so at the moment, there's significant work being done around what is out there that we can appropriately use internationally, but also what might our own bespoke South African apps look like. And I would be very, very happy to just keep you close to that conversation and any particular documents or thinking and that comes out of that particular work stream around the technology-enabled WBAs and entrustable professional activities. So I look forward to doing that.
Thanks. That makes sense. So maybe it's a case of sort of waiting to see what technologies or platforms the college favor or endorse, and then going with those rather than committing to something else that may not be fit for purpose in the end.
I mean, Adam, can I just ask you, is there been a national conversation around EPAs within the context of your discipline or not?
There has. We've heard of them, and we've been asked to contribute. So I think the process is ongoing. We've all heard about it, and we know that it's something that we need to do, but not in a huge amount of detail. It's more just, I guess, for us at the moment, starting to think about and develop our discipline-specific EPAs. But in terms of the actual, nuts and bolts of implementation and how it's going to go, we haven't heard much about that. But I assume it is because it's still in its planning stages.
Okay, so just for you and for the benefit of others, I must just note the other three streams just very quickly that's happening nationally. And I must emphasize that this is not a national product. That's not, or project, in the sense that that's not where it's at. Where it's at is at the discipline level. And you could argue that at an institution level, but really it's a discipline level in the sense that within a discipline, everybody has to be on the same page across the different institutions. So firstly, to note that the one work stream is around the development of EPAs, and that's been there's faculty development then that the courses that can be adapted to be used for as in train the clinical trainers as well, that courses develop EPAs themselves, and then the second stream is the operationalizing, and that's where the faculty development comes in, and modifying the existing train the clinical trainers and train the trainer courses that incorporates then appropriate WBA related training and EPA related training in terms of implementation thereof. So it's really it's the development work stream is the one. The implementation work stream is the second. The technology is related work stream is the third. And then the fourth is around just quite simply the regulatory framework that needs to be in place to put the EPAs in place in the context of the EnMed. And those are the four areas of work that are happening. Okay. Elaine, do go ahead.
Thank you very much for this. I found it very interesting. I'm from dentistry, and my question is, are you aware of anything in this regard that is being developed for dentistry?
Yeah, Elaine, I really appreciate you being on the call, because it's concerned me somewhat. The national discussion is supposed to be including dentistry. Why? Because it's the Medical and Dental Board, in that essentially under the HBCSA and the South African Committee of Medical Deans is bring. So we don't have the voice of dentistry in the room at the national level. I have the next committee meeting is actually tomorrow afternoon, and that's led by Vanessa Birch and Lionel Green Thompson. Lionel, in his capacity, is the chairperson of the South African Committee of Medical Deans, and And Vanessa, in her capacity as one of the leading health educationalists in the country, and she's consulting to the college or the colleges. And I will raise it tomorrow because it has been flagged beforehand, and we need to take that conversation up. And if there is a particular contact within the WITS context, A, and then B within the national context that you could potentially share with me, and we could take it offline as to how we bring dentistry more into the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I'll be in touch with you.
Yeah, please do. You're very welcome.
Thanks.
Good. All right, colleagues. I'm gonna call it there, if I may. It's 17:02. A small group today, but always good to just keep the conversation going. And thanks very much for your attendance today.